The horse came back alone, but the boy didn't. The golden sun sets over rolling hills, painting the sky in amber and purple. An old wooden porch creaks as a weathered cowboy rocks gently in his chair, the soft glow of lantern light illuminating his face. You know, there's something special about these summer evenings out here in Montana. The way the light hits those mountains just before dark, the chorus of crickets start in their nightly song. It takes me back to a time long ago, back when I was just a young buck of 17, still green behind the ears and thinking I knew everything worth knowing. I remember it clear as yesterday, though it's been nearly 50 years now. That summer of '75 taught me more about life, loss, and what truly matters than any other time in my days on this earth. Y'all might want to settle in for this one. It ain't a short tale, but I reckon it's worth the telling. Back then, my family owned the Double Creek Ranch, about 60 miles south of where we're sitting now. Wasn't the biggest spread around these parts, but it was ours had been since my granddaddy's time. We ran about 300 head of cattle, had 20-some horses, and enough troubles to keep us honest, as my daddy used to say. That particular summer started rough. We'd lost near a quarter of our herd to a harsh winter, and spring brought more rain than the land could handle. Fields turned to mud, and we were all working double time, just trying to keep the ranch afloat. Then came Jamie Sullivan. Skinny little feller, couldn't have been more than 13, with a mop of unruly red hair and a face full of freckles that seemed to multiply in the sun. His mama had passed the winter before, and his daddy, an old friend of my father's from their army days, had written his skin if the boy could spend the summer with us. Thought some hard work and open country might do him good. Now, I wasn't exactly thrilled about babysitting some city kid from Chicago. I had my own problems, my own dreams. Was Savon up to buy my first truck, had my eye on Mary Beth Johnson from over in Riverton, and the last thing I needed was some snot-nosed kid following me around like a lost puppy. But my daddy, he wasn't the kind of man you said no to. That boy needs this place more than you need your privacy, son, he told me the night before Jamie arrived. Sometimes the good Lord puts people in our path for reasons we don't understand till much later. I didn't know then how right he was. Jamie showed up on the Tuesday Greyhound, clutching a small suitcase and looking like he might bolt back onto that bus given half a chance. He was quiet that first week, hardly said more than yes, sir, and no, sir at the supper table. My little sister Abigail took to him right away, but me? I kept my distance. Then came that old buckskin gelding we called Rusty. Meanest, orneriest horse on our property. Had a habit of biting anyone who got too close and could throw a rider quicker than you could say jackrabbit. Daddy had been mayonnaise to sell him off, but hadn't found the time. One morning, I caught Jamie standing by Rusty's corral just watching him. Next day, same thing. By the third day, that darn horse was coming over to the fence when the boy approached. A week later, Jamie was handing him apple slices from his palm, and that horse was gentle as a lamb. How'd you do that? I asked him, finally curious enough to break my silence. Jamie just shrugged those skinny shoulders. I don't talk much, so I listen better. Rusty just wanted someone to understand him. Something about the way he said it, so simple but so true, made me see this kid differently. Maybe there was more to him than I'd given credit for. As June rolled into July, I started bringing Jamie along on my daily rides. Taught him how to mend fences, how to spot a sick cow from a distance, how to read the weather from the shape of the clouds. He soaked it all up like a sponge, never complaining even when the work was hard and the sun unforgiving. And he had this way about him, this quiet kindness. He'd spot a bird's nest that had fallen and carefully place it back in the tree. He'd make sure the barn cats got the choicest scraps from dinner. Little things most folks wouldn't notice, but I did. One evening, as we were heading back to the house after a long day, Jamie finally opened up about his mama. How she'd fought cancer for 3 years. How he'd read to her every night until she couldn't hear him anymore. How his daddy had started drinking heavy after she passed, barely noticing Jamie was still there. I think that's why he sent me here, Jamie said, his voice barely above a whisper. He doesn't know what to do with me now that she's gone. Those words hit me hard, right in the chest. Here I'd been, acting all put out about having this kid around, when what he needed most was just to belong somewhere for a while. From that day on, I made it my mission to show Jamie everything I loved about ranch life. We'd rise before dawn, saddle up, and ride out to watch the sunrise paint the valley. I taught him how to track deer through the forest, how to catch trout with just a piece of string and a bent nail, how to whistle through a blade of grass. And somehow, along the way, that skinny city kid started teaching me things too. He had a way of seeing beauty in stuff I'd long taken for granted. The perfect spiral of a snail's shell. How the wind made waves across the tall grass. The different songs birds sang at different times of day. You know what my mama used to say? He told me once as we sat by the creek, tossing pebbles into the current. She said people are so busy running toward tomorrow or away from yesterday that they forget to notice today. Wisdom beyond his years, that one. August came, bringing with it the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer above the ground. We were in the midst of the hottest, driest spell anyone could remember. Daddy had us all on high alert for wildfire. It would only take one lightning strike, one careless camper up in the hills, and everything we had could go up in flames. It was on one of those scorcher days that everything changed. We'd been moving cattle to a higher pasture where the grass was still decent. Jamie had proven himself capable enough that Daddy trusted him to ride Rusty, who'd become downright devoted to the boy. They made an unlikely pair, the gangly red-headed kid and that ornery buckskin, but they understood each other somehow. Around midday, dark clouds started gathering over the mountains to the west. Thunderheads, big ones. My daddy looked at the sky, then at me. "You and Jamie take the horses and head back to the ranch," he said. "Me and the boys will finish up here and bring the cattle in before that storm hits." I nodded, not thinking twice about it. We'd done this dance before. Summer storms could roll in fast in these parts, and you didn't want to be caught out in the open when the lightning started. Jamie and I set off toward home, pushing the horses at a good clip. We were maybe halfway back when the wind shifted suddenly, bringing with it a smell that made my blood run cold smoke. I reined in my horse, standing in the stirrups to get a better look. Sure enough, off to the south, a plume of dark smoke was rising into the sky, growing larger by the second. "What is it?" Jamie asked, his eyes wide. "Fire," I said, my mouth gone dry. "And with this wind." I didn't finish the thought. Didn't need to. The wind was blowing straight toward our ranch. I made a split-second decision. "Jamie, you ride straight back to the house. Tell my mama to start packing up important papers and photos. Tell her to get Abigail and be ready to leave if needed. I'm going to cut across to warn my daddy and the others." Jamie nodded, his freckles standing out sharp against his suddenly pale face. But there was determination there, too. "Be careful," he said. "You too, kid. Don't stop for nothing. You hear? Not until you reach the house." He nodded again, turned Rusty toward home, and took off at a gallop. I watched him for just a second, that red hair flying in the wind, his small form balanced perfectly in the saddle, before I turned my own horse south and rode hard toward where I'd last seen my father. What happened over the next few hours is mostly a blur in my memory. I found my daddy and the ranch hands. The fire was moving fast, faster than any I'd ever seen, fed by the dry grass and pushed by the strengthening wind. We managed to get most of the cattle to the Stone Canyon, where they'd be safe, then started the desperate ride back to the ranch. By the time we crested the last hill, I knew something was wrong. The smoke was thicker here, almost choking, and through it I could see flames licking at the edges of our property. The house itself wasn't burning yet, but it was only a matter of time. As we raced down toward the yard, I saw my mama standing by the truck, Abigail clutched tight against her. Their faces were streaked with soot, their eyes wide with fear. And there, standing beside them, was Rusty, without a rider. My heart stopped cold in my chest. "Where's Jamie?" I shouted as I pulled up, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. My mama's voice shook. "He came tearing in here 20 minutes ago, told us about the fire. We started gathering things up, and then he said Old Man Wilson's place." My blood went even colder. Old Man Wilson lived about 2 miles east of us, in a small cabin set back in the trees. He was near 90, half-deaf, and lived alone since his wife passed. Jamie said someone needed to warn him. My mama continued, tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face. Said he might not know about the fire. "I told him to wait for you boys, but he said there wasn't time. He left Rusty here and took off on foot through the east woods. Said it'd be faster than riding around by the road." I looked toward the east, where the trees were now obscured by a wall of smoke. The fire was spreading there too, feeling its way through the dry underbrush like hungry fingers. Without thinking, I turned my horse. My daddy's hand caught my arm. "Son, you can't. It's too dangerous. Fire service is on their way." "But Jamie's out there," I shouted, fear making my voice crack. "He doesn't know these woods like I do. And I can't lose you both," my daddy roared back, his face twisted with a fear I'd never seen there before. In the end, it wasn't my choice to make. The fire moved too fast, cutting off any path I might have taken. The next hours passed in a nightmare of smoke and ash and praying like I'd never prayed before. The volunteer firefighters came, then crews from 3 counties over. We saved the house, barely, though we lost the south barn and about 100 acres of grazing land. And we lost Jamie. They found him the next morning, curled up beside Old Man Wilson under a rocky overhang near the creek. The old man was alive, though badly smoke-affected. Jamie had gotten to him in time, had led him away from the cabin moments before it was engulfed in flames. They'd almost made it to safety when the smoke became too thick. The coroner said Jamie had given Wilson his own shirt, soaked in creek water, to breathe through. So the boy probably could have made it out if he'd been thinking only of himself. But that wasn't Jamie's way. Never had been. I've lived a lot of life since that terrible day. I've known joy and sorrow, success and failure. I've raised 3 children of my own on this very land, watched them grow into fine adults with families of their own. But I've never forgotten that skinny boy with the red hair and quiet wisdom, the way he tamed an untamable horse, the way he saw beauty in the smallest things, the way he gave his life so an old man could live another decade. You know, Rusty never let another soul ride him after Jamie. Lived another 15 years, but would only take apples from my hand if I talked real gentle, the way Jamie used to. Almost like he was always waiting for his true rider to come back. Sometimes on evenings like this, when the light hits the hills just so, I imagine I can see a small figure on a buckskin horse, riding along the ridgeline, free as the wind, at peace. That summer taught me the true meaning of courage. Not the showy kind that gets written about in books, but the quiet kind that puts others first without counting the cost. The kind that does what's right even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Life's funny that way. Sometimes the people who touch us most deeply are the ones who are with us for the shortest time. And sometimes the greatest heroes aren't the ones who ride into town with guns blazing, but the ones who notice a bird's nest that's fallen and gently place it back where it belongs. I still miss that boy, every single day. But in a way, he never really left. Part of him lives on in how I try to move through this world, in how I taught my children to listen more than they talk, in how I still take time every day to notice something beautiful that others might miss. And in the lessons I share with folks like you, sitting here on this porch as the day fades into night. So next time you see a sunset that takes your breath away, or hear a bird singing its heart out in a tree, think of Jamie. Take a moment to really see it, really hear it. That'd honor his memory better than any monument ever could. The old cowboy falls silent, his weathered face softened in the fading light. A gentle breeze stirs the wind chimes hanging from the porch roof, creating a melody that seems to carry his words out across the darkening valley. You know, they say there ain't no such thing as a perfect horse, just like there ain't no such thing as a perfect person. But that summer, I learned that sometimes the ones with the roughest edges have the purest hearts. Rusty knew it about Jamie before any of us did. Animals have a way of seeing past our human nonsense, straight to who we really are. That fire changed our land, but it changed me even more. Made me realize how precious each day is, how quickly it can all be taken away. Made me pay attention to the small moments. A child's laugh, the smell of rain on dry earth, the way my wife's eyes crinkle at the corners when she smiles. Jamie would have been in his 60s now, if he'd lived. Sometimes I wonder what kind of man he would have become, what kind of legacy he might have built. But then I think maybe his legacy is already here, living on in every person who heard his story and decided to be a little kinder, a little more present, a little more brave. After it happened, my daddy sat me down on this very porch. I was angry at the fire, at Jamie for being so foolhardy and myself for not being there. Son, he said, some people are just passing through our lives, but that don't make their impact any less mighty. That boy taught us all something about selfless love, and that's a gift beyond measure. He was right, of course. My daddy usually was. Years later, when my oldest son was about the age Jamie had been, he asked me why I always stopped to help strangers, even when we were in a hurry. I told him Jamie's story for the first time. When I finished, my boy was quiet for a long while. So, he finally said, Jamie's like a hero, right? The very best kind. I answered. The next day, I found my son carefully returning a fallen nestling to its nest, standing on tiptoe to reach the branch. When he saw me watching, he just shrugged and said, I figured Jamie would have done it. And that's how legends are born. Not in grand gestures or famous battles, but in small acts of kindness that ripple outward, touching life after life. The horse came back alone, but the boy never really left us. The cowboy leans forward, his eyes suddenly bright in the gathering dusk. Now, I don't often ask favors of folks who listen to my stories, but I'm going to ask one of you tonight. If this tale touched your heart in any way, I'd be mighty obliged if you'd share it with someone else. Maybe subscribe so you don't miss the next story I got to tell. Give a like if it stirred something in your soul. But more important than any of that, tomorrow, when you wake up, try to see the world through Jamie's eyes just for a little while. Notice the beauty in the ordinary. Be kind when it's easier not to be. And remember that the greatest heroes often leave no trace except in the hearts of those whose lives they touched. That's Jamie's legacy. And maybe, in some small way, it can be yours too. As darkness finally claims the valley, the old cowboy rocks gently in his chair, at peace with his memories, the cricket chorus rising to fill the night with its ancient, endless song. The cowboy sat quiet for a spell after finishing his tale, hat tilted low, thumb drawing slow circles on the worn arm of his rocking chair. The fire crackled low, throwing long shadows across the porch. No one spoke for a while, and that silence, well, it felt sacred somehow. After a minute or two, he leaned back and sighed, as if releasing a weight he'd carried for decades. You know, he said softly, folks always ask me what really happened to Jamie. Truth is, no one rightly. That night, after the old cowboy disappeared behind the creaky door of his cabin, no one moved. Not for a long while. The fire snapped softly, and the stars overhead blinked like they were listening too. Even the crickets seemed quieter, their song more thoughtful somehow. It was one of those rare moments where silence wraps around a group like a blanket, not heavy or sad, but reverent. A kind of hush that says, something sacred just passed through here. Finally, someone stirred. A little girl, no older than 8, sitting cross-legged by her father's boots. She looked up and asked, was Jamie real? Her father paused, then nodded slowly, as if the answer deserved a moment to settle. He's as real as you and me, he said softly. Maybe even more. The girl reached in her coat pocket and pulled out a small, wrinkled paper, a drawing of a boy on a horse, riding across hills, a bird flying beside him. She held it out to her father and whispered, can we keep this somewhere safe? So I don't forget him. He smiled and tucked the drawing gently into his coat, pressing it to his chest like a secret. And just like that, Jamie had touched another heart. The story didn't stay in that valley. Like a feather carried by the wind, it floated outward, from one porch to the next, across counties through towns and cities. Some told it just as it was. Others dressed it up in new names and fresh endings. But the heart of it always remained the same. A boy, a horse, a storm, and a choice. And something in that quiet choice, to do good when no one's watching, to be kind when it costs you something, well, that touched people deeper than most expected. In distant towns, children started putting bowls of water out for stray animals without being asked. Teenagers helped classmates they barely knew. Strangers picked up dropped groceries for folks they'd never see again. They didn't always know why, but sometimes when asked, they'd smile and say, I figured Jamie would have done it. One winter evening, in a diner just off a lonely stretch of highway, a tired traveler helped a waitress clean up a tray of shattered glasses. She thanked him with a surprised smile. He just tipped his hat and said, Jamie would have done it. She blinked and asked, "Jamie who?" The man shrugged. "Doesn't matter. You'll know him when you see him." Back in the valley, the old cowboy lived many more seasons. His steps grew slower, his eyes dimmed a bit, but his heart never did. Every now and then, someone would come knocking at his door. A young man with a quiet question, a woman who'd heard whispers of a legend and wanted to know the real story. He welcomed them all with tea and tales. He kept a journal by the fire, filled with letters sent from people across the country. Letters about how Jamie's story helped a firefighter stay calm in a blaze, or gave a nurse the strength to be kind to a dying man no one else visited. There are teachers who told Jamie's story to their students, and kids who listened like it was a secret treasure passed hand to hand. On the last page of that journal, the cowboy wrote one final sentence. Heroes don't need monuments. They need echoes. When the cowboy passed, the whole valley gathered to say goodbye. They didn't come because he was famous. They came because he mattered. People brought stories, letters, feathers, drawings. A boy placed a tiny wooden horse beside the old man's empty chair. A woman read aloud Jamie's story by lantern light, and her voice trembled at the end. When the fire burned down to embers, no one felt empty, because they understood something deep, something that doesn't get written in books or carved into stone. Stories like Jamie's don't end. They keep writing. They find new hearts, new hands, new ways to live on. And now, maybe that story has found you. Maybe Jamie's spirit reached across time and space to touch your life tonight, wherever you're sitting. Maybe there's someone waiting for your kindness tomorrow. A door you could hold open, a word you could speak, a wrong you could quietly right. Maybe that's how it keeps going, not through glory or noise, but through quiet choices made when no one's watching. Maybe it's your turn to carry the story forward. So if this tale stirred something in your soul, I'd be mighty grateful if you passed it on. Share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe if you want to hear the next story I've got waiting. Like it if it's settled somewhere deep inside. But most of all, tomorrow, when you wake up, try to see the world through Jamie's eyes just for a little while. Look for the beauty in the ordinary. Be kind, even when it's easier not to be. And remember, the greatest heroes don't always leave footprints. Sometimes they leave hearts changed in their wake. And in the hush of night, as the stars blink quiet above the valley, the old rocking chair sways in the wind, and the crickets rise again with their ancient, endless song. Somewhere out there, a horse runs free beneath the moon, and if you listen close, you might just hear a boy's laughter carried on the breeze, soft, wild, and free. He never really left us. He never will. And so the seasons turned, as they always do. The valley changed little by little. Fences weathered. Trees grew taller. The wind carved new paths through the grass. But Jamie's story never faded. In fact, it grew stronger like roots deep underground, unseen but powerful. People kept showing up. Some brought old letters they'd never mailed. Some brought their children to listen. And some came just to sit in silence beside the porch, like they could still hear that old cowboy's voice if the crickets were quiet long enough. Years later, someone placed a small, hand-carved plaque on the edge of the trail near where the horse had returned alone. It didn't have Jamie's name. It didn't need to. It simply said, "Kindness leaves a trail you can follow, even in the dark." And folks did follow it, from nearby ranches to distant cities, across borders through generations. Parents told their kids, teachers told their students, and strangers told strangers in hospital rooms, coffee shops, and quiet conversations when someone just needed a little bit of light. It wasn't about the boy anymore. It was about the spirit he left behind. One day, a young woman in New York, someone who'd never ridden a horse or heard a coyote howl, stood up on a subway train to help an elderly man who'd dropped his groceries. When someone asked her why, she just smiled and said, "Because someone once helped me, and they told me a story I never forgot." She'd never been to the valley, but Jamie had reached her all the same. You see, that's how legends survive. Not in marble or metals, but in motion, moving from one heart to another, passed like fire from candle to candle, never dimming, just growing. And maybe, just maybe, tonight that fire has reached you. So here's what I ask, not just as a storyteller, but as someone who believes in the kind of world Jamie dreamed of. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of something good and true, then don't let it stop with you. Share this story. Let it travel further. Send it to someone who needs a reason to smile. Give it a like. That little tap means more than you think. Subscribe if you'd like to sit by this fire again sometime and hear the next tale waiting to be told. But more than anything, share it, because stories like this don't belong to just one person. They belong to everyone. Let's keep Jamie's spirit alive, in the small acts, in the quiet courage, in the kindness we choose when no one's watching. Let's make sure that fire never goes out. And as the night folds itself around the hills and the old chair creaks one last time, maybe, just maybe, the world becomes a little gentler, a little braver, and a little more beautiful, because you decided to carry the story forward. And for that, I thank you.